Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
But how will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
This is a path of extraordinarily dangerous escalation. And now, to make it definitive, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which I would bet was a U.S. action, perhaps U.S. and Poland. This is
Jeff,
speculation.
we got to stop there. That's quite a statement as well. Why do you feel that was a U.S. action? What evidence do you have of that?
Well, first of all, there's direct radar evidence that U.S. helicopters, military helicopters that are normally based in Gdansk, were circling over this area. We also had the threats from the United States earlier in this year that one way or another, we are going to end Nord Stream.
One way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
We also have a remarkable statement by Secretary Blinken last Friday in a press conference. He says, this is also a tremendous opportunity.
This is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs.
It's a strange way to, it's a strange way to talk if you're worried about the piracy on international infrastructure of vital significance. So I know this runs counter to our narrative. You're not allowed to say these things in the West, but the fact of the matter is, all over the world, when I talk to people, they think the U.S. did it. And just to tell you, and by the way, even reporters on our papers that are involved tell me privately, yeah, well, of course, but it doesn't show up in our media.
When we look at this map, we see the location of the Nord Stream pipeline between Germany and Russia, and the zones of attack are very close to the north of Poland in the Baltic Sea, which very much is controlled by NATO. Researchers at Uppsala University in Sweden detected seismic activity at the exact same time as the pipeline leaks, which was characteristic of explosions, and this seismic activity differed significantly from seafloor earthquake seismic activity, which has its own seismic fingerprint. So the evidence points to a deliberate act of sabotage. 115,000 tons of methane probably had been released during the initial sudden pressure drop in Nord Stream 2 following the explosion, on the basis of the pipe's dimensions and the water temperature, according to engineers first assessing the scene. Per unit mass, methane has a much more potent greenhouse effect, according to many scientists, than carbon dioxide, particularly in the short term. So the overall impact of this leak is equivalent to the annual carbon emissions from 2 million cars. Even climate change activists argue that once the leak was discovered, setting it alight could actually have mitigated much of the damage by converting the methane to carbon dioxide. So let's say that the person or group who detonated explosives with the goal of destroying or damaging these pipelines so that they could no longer be used to transmit oil had a noble motive, which was to end the use of fossil fuels. That might not be your idea of a noble motive, or many people's idea of a noble motive, but it was their idea of a noble motive. Did they succeed even in that goal? Well, given that the volume of greenhouse gases produced or emitted as a result of these gas pipeline explosions exceeds the volume of greenhouse gases gases produced by 2 million cars running on full blast every day for over a year, the answer would appear to be a pretty definitive F, no. So even if you thought that it was a good idea to ban or restrict severely or massively curtail the quantity of fossil fuel used by Europeans, it doesn't look as though this method was in any way successful at all. It's certainly no secret that previous American presidents and top government officials have not been fans of the fact that Europeans buy their energy from Russia instead of buying their energy from America. Let's listen to Donald Trump and later Condoleezza Rice talk about this very topic.
President Trump confirmed Europe's worst pre-summit fears by using the NATO stage to criticize allies, blasting Germany over a natural gas pipeline deal with Russia.
It's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia.
German officials deny that the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline will allow Russia to exert undue influence over their country.
I also understand that one of the complications is the Europeans, who are very dependent on the Russians for energy supply and business relationships, but they also need to recognize that if Putin is not stopped now, we could find ourselves in a real conflict with Russia down the road.
Well, actually, let me jump in right there. Germany, arguably the strongest power in Europe, at least economically. Right. There's been criticism that Angela Merkel and others haven't been aggressive enough. What do you think of that? Do you think Germany's been as aggressive as they should be?
Now we need to have tougher sanctions, and I'm afraid at some point this is going to probably have to involve oil and gas. The Russian economy is vulnerable. 80% of Russian exports are in oil, gas, and minerals. People say, well, the Europeans will run out of energy. Well, the Russians will run out of cash before the Europeans run out of energy.
While not all Russians have run out of cash, Condoleezza, Putin apparently isn't the only billionaire unaffected by sanctions. Andrei Scotch made almost $200 million from metals and mining.
The Russians will run out of cash.
While the founder of e-commerce retailer Wildberries, Tatyana Bakalchuk, has also made hundreds of millions in the last 6 months.
The Russians will run out of cash.
Andrei Guriev, the former head of Fosagro, which is one of the 4 largest producers of phosphate-based fertilizer, saw his net worth rise by 33.8% or $2.68 billion, with a total net worth of $10.6 billion.
The Russians will run out of cash.
Turning east for trading partners, Russia has agreed a Power of Siberia gas pipeline with President Xi. This will transport Russian gas to eastern China via Mongolia, near North Korea, which is another country causing problems for Western powers lately with its recent test firing of a nuclear missile over Japan. Civilians throughout Europe are being told to draw comfort from the arrival of British warships off the Scottish coast, apparently to protect North Sea gas pipelines from Russian attacks. I don't know about you, but nothing helps me sleep better at night than knowing that our most critical infrastructure is surrounded by enough military hardware to vaporize the Northern Hemisphere. It could be worse, though. At least these weapons aren't controlled by a historically indebted, deeply unpopular government, which hurtles from one self-made crisis to the next with astonishing alacrity. No, wait a minute. It's through the provocation or perpetuation of crises that governments try to prove to you that you need them. Luckily for Liz Truss, the approval boost she craves will appear in due course, together with forced microchipping, shortly before the Battle of Armageddon. In the meantime, Russia's Gazprom has suspended gas deliveries to Italy, blaming a transport problem in Austria, which is less than ideal considering that Italy's reliance on oil imports exceeds even Germany's. Russia is rerouting trade to other BRICS nations while creating alternative payment mechanisms ever since its exclusion from SWIFT. Interestingly, while defense ministers from a number of European countries called out the blatant irresponsible attacks against critical civilian infrastructure, they stopped short of attributing any blame, which in and of itself was extremely telling. Meanwhile, Germans are being told to stockpile wood in fear of gas shortages, and they're also being told to consume less, which is making a lot of them very angry. This is why we see protests in places like the Czech Republic. Add to that, humiliatingly for Germany, at the same time as it shuts down half of its 6 remaining nuclear power plants, it has to accept a shipment of used Russian uranium for reprocessing. How devastating. Why? Because the EU sanctions did not specifically make reprocessing Russian uranium illegal. So, amid surging energy costs, Chancellor Olaf Scholz did a very similar thing to other European leaders in that he borrowed 95 billion euros in order to introduce an energy cap. Borrowed lots and lots of money, which is what Truss has done here in the UK. German electricity costs thus have come down, but it's on the backs of children that don't actually happen to have been born yet. Here in the UK, Elizabeth Truss says that she wants to grow people's income, but why would she need to unless taxes were as high as they are? It actually costs less money to fill your car up with petrol if you're a resident of Russia than if you live in the USA or in the UK, which is an interesting statistic I found. And we also note that Russia is even taxing big energy giants, presumably because the mass exodus of citizens from Russia has left the government with a tax income shortfall or revenue shortfall which it needs to recover elsewhere.
Professor, I don't want to get into tit for tat about what did or did not happen with Nord Stream because I don't have the evidence and we don't have a counterbalance to this. There is an issue, though, that's at the heart of what you're saying, which is a lack of trust in the United States, a lack of cohesion in allies in the midst of incredible political as well as economic strife. I mean, do you see the likelihood of working together at a time when there are such disparate interests and feelings of distrust?
The biggest problem is that we have major geopolitical conflict, not only U.S. and Russia, but also U.S. and China. So, and again, with a tremendous amount of provocation coming from the U.S. side as well. So we're breaking any sense of stability right now. For the moment, many in Europe are saying, well, the U.S. is our closest ally. We need to hold on. But watch what's happening politically. There's upheaval in Europe, country after country right now. We're entering a period of enormous instability, and we're unstable in the United States as well. We went through an insurrection. We're still not past that. So we're entering the most unstable geopolitical era in many decades. We're entering the first hyperinflation in more than 40 years, and we're entering the first escalation to the nuclear precipice in 60 years. 60 years exactly this month was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this is the most dangerous moment since the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's an extraordinary overload, and we see no attempt to tamp this down, to quiet it down. Every day is about escalation. We're going to defeat the other side. We have our rights. We can stand up what we want. We have Speaker Pelosi flying to Taiwan. Right. So many provocations in the midst of huge instability.